Good afternoon. My name is Nima Dhingra, and I am the Marketing Coordinator here at BASS. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, How to Deliver On Time, Every Time, presented by MISys. MISys is one of the few manufacturing solutions endorsed by BASS and is known for its ability to either run as a standalone system or integrate with other accounting softwares, including Sage 300. So today we will be hearing from Al Alessi, Senior Technical Sales Representative, and later he will be joined by Charlie Kimball, who is the VP of Sales and Marketing at MISys. So I do ask that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just type them into the chat box on the right hand of your screen, and they will be addressed towards the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I will pass the presenter on. So I'll pass it on to the Masters of MISys, Charlie and Al.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yes, my name is Al Alessi. I'm down here in scenic Vermont, just over the border, and I hope you're all having some nice weather. It's been a strange May for sure, but we're here to look at MRP, and I like to start, if this is completely new to you all, I like to start with a flowchart just so that you get an idea. I mean, yes, MISys can work as a standalone, but it's fairly rare, and typically we're integrated with an accounting package, and of course, historically we've integrated with Sage 300 since the ACPAC Plus days, if you want to go back that far. But there is a division of labor, so it's important that you at least get a sense of how the two systems work together. Sage 300 is going to be your customer interface. Of course, there's a great CRM that's part of that package, and all of that's going to be happening over here, the outside world. And Sage 300 is going to be thinking in terms of sales orders and maybe forecasts, and it's going to ship and invoice the customers with finished goods. And in fact, the inventory in Sage 300 is going to be finished goods. So the metaphor I've been working with lately is it's like a Best Buy or a Kmart or something like that, a J.C. Penney, where there's finished goods on the shelf, and it's the retail store, and it just thinks of it as units of that finished good. MISys is the factory that delivers finished goods to the retail operation. So MISys takes demand. Now this says convert sales orders, and we can do that, but it really is converting demand into production orders. And those production orders in turn spawn the need for sub-assembly production orders perhaps, and all in all it's going to drive the demand depending on how much you have already available, but it's going to drive the demand for raw materials. So MISys is going to establish purchase orders. It's going to receive on those purchase orders timely fashion in order to meet your master production schedule. And the master production schedule is really, the short of it is that you're going to release, allocate into WIP, complete, and transfer the finished goods in a particular quantity and on a particular date. And that's what the master production schedule says. This is what we need in this quantity and on that date. So MISys handles all the complications of back flushing, of looking at all of the materials down through and up through 16 nested sublevels if you need to go that far. It's aware of your supplier lead times. It's aware of your assembly lead times, both sub-assemblies and top level and so forth. So all that comes together so that you can deliver to your retail side of the house what it needs to have. There's two other parts to the integration which are less important for today's discussion, but they are. As long as I'm here, I'll just let you know that MISys does the buying, but it doesn't do the paying. So MISys has a direct post to accounts payable. So Sage would still do the check writing. And certainly a very interesting area is MISys has full accounting functionality. We call it a subledger, where every credit and debit that you do in manufacturing is captured and posted to the GL, including the basis of your cost of goods sold. It's the value of your manufacturing assets, it's your WIP assets, it's your write-off adjustments, it's all of those things will reflect in the GL as well. I'm going to leave it on that. I just, again, for those that this was new and you had not ever looked at MISys in integration with Sage 300, that's really kind of the 5-mile-high view. This is the front page or the dashboard of MISys. So when you first log into MISys, you're going to see really 4 different quadrants, if you will. You can size those any way that you want. But the upper right, you can aim it to whatever. I've got it aimed to the MISys Sage web page on the MISys website, and it's live, and I can click around and do all sorts of things here. The lower right is where MISys shares information with our customers. The upper left is where we have alerts, and we've only included a few. You can make as many. You could have 1,000 alerts. I don't recommend 1,000, but these are real fun and powerful because you can say, well, look, any time any stock drops below minimum level, turn that green ball red, and also send an email to the following people that is what has happened with these fields, in whatever fields you want. I mean, you can have them all or just 3 or 4 of those fields included. So this is a powerful way to always be on top of what's going on in MISys. The lower left is how you navigate through the system. So I'm not going to give you a complete tour of MISys since the focus is specifically on MRP, which is this planning area. The 3 main areas for day-to-day activity in MISys is you're either I call it the P patch. You're either producing or you're purchasing or you're planning what to produce and what to purchase. Under the hood, you've set up all security groups and you've made decisions about revision control or serial lot tracking or what type of costing. I'm running standard, by the way. Will you allow negative stocks? Do you want to capture landed costs? How much decimal precision? We go up to 6. I mean, so you've done a whole bunch of things. Here's the link to Sage 300. These are the subledger accounts out of the box. There's room for flexibility on those and all that. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through those kind of details. I'm going to go to the to the planning part of this functionality. As way of introduction, though, I am going to, if you were a strictly make-to-order company in MISys, you would be able to retrieve Sage 300 sales orders, and it's reading those. And I've got a few right here, and here's any one of these. I'm just going to take this line, and I'm going to create a in location 1. I'm going to create a manufacturing order to build those 100 units, and it wants me to populate the production order from the bill of material for the I-50. This is a manufacturing order in MISys. It's called a manufacturing order. It clones the bill of material. It shows the customer. It shows the sales order number. It shows the delivery due date, the day I'm supposed to start it, the day it's supposed to be finished, the quantity needed, and it brought in the bill of material times 100. So I need 400 of this, 100 of this, 200 of this, and so forth. There's my stock as we sit. That's a moving target. It may not look quite the same tomorrow if I'm a busy plant. But what I wanted to show you is kind of one of the simplest approaches to an MRP in MISys, just to give you kind of the other end of what I'm going to show you in about 2 minutes. This is that you can buy for a specific manufacturing order and be exactly what you'd want to do. If you don't carry much inventory, or some people say they don't carry anything. It's hard to believe that all the time, but if you click this button right here that says Create MRP to buy the material for this manufacturing order, and you can include all the sub-assemblies, which these 2 bottom lines are sub-assemblies. They actually have parts as well, which I'll show you in a second, actually. But if I say buy for this, I'm literally creating a shopping list for that exact order. And so on one end of the spectrum, I can just move right down through this line as the buyer and buy Let's buy the wire. In fact, there it is, I01, and you do this, and you do by detail. You'd pick which supplier you want to choose from. There's their recent costs, and there's the purchase units. One company sells in spools, the other sells by the foot, whatever. There's each supplier's product code and so forth. So I'll go with a Xide, and I say new PO, or I could have added it to this PO if it's an open PO and so forth. But now I have this. I can either buy, well, can I buy 1,050? No, you got to buy multiples of reorder, so it's 5,000 is the reorder point, and I say create PO, and I'm sort of done for that that particular piece, and I'd work my way all the way through that environment. However, if you only had a few orders at a time, this might be very doable. And the companies that tend to do this, that seems to be the case. But if you are a company that has a lot of demand across many different products, it becomes harder and harder exponentially to try to stay on top and looking to aggregate your demand. So I've got 3 bills of material that we're looking at. There's an I-50, an I-51, and an I-52. And so if I open up the bill of material for the I-50, I'm going to see material. There's raw material. There's 2 sub-assemblies. Exploding this bill of material, I see that each of these sub-assemblies has component parts as well. Some companies pre-build sub-assemblies, other companies don't. All of this will be different for each of you, I'm sure. But this is the full definition of what an I-50 is. If you pre-build I-40s and I-45s, of course, this is all that you need to put that final thing together. I've established how long it takes to build this. It's 3 days. And there are sophisticated options here for that. I mean, I could say I can only make up to 1,000 in 3 days. I can set those types of limitations. There are all sorts of decisions I can make around alternates and so forth if I needed to do that. The other thing about each of these 3 bills of material is that I have them linked to a sales item on the Sage side, so that's important for you to know. They could be called the same thing, or they be called something else. But that's an important part for you to know. So once you get to many products, many raw materials, many sub-assemblies, cross-referencing across different product lines, it becomes much, much harder to stay on top of your planning functionality. So MISys has time-phased, time-sensitive, master production schedule-based MRP. And so I'm going to show you exactly what we mean by that. First, when you initialize a master production schedule, it's going to read your current raw materials, sub-assemblies, and finished goods inventory, including finished goods that reside on the Sage 300 side of the table. It's also going to look at all existing work orders, manufacturing orders, and purchase orders, and what the materials are there. If it's a purchase order, what did you order, what quantities, and what is the due delivery date. If it's a production order, what are you making, and what's the finished assembly date. And it's going to read, if you want, it would read any sales orders in the system and make determinations about your sales order. It would grab that information, we call it initializing, and create essentially a master production schedule. In addition, if you wished, you could apply a scheduling batch to, and this could be a forecast, it could be your best guesses, it could reflect invoices from the same quarter last year, or however you'd want to do that. A lot of companies will have a reality-based master production schedule based on sales orders, and then a more of a forecast-driven view, and play the two off of each other from a strategic point of view. One way or the other, you're going to end up with a master production schedule or several master production schedules, which would generate a material requirements plan with dated purchase orders and dated production orders to do what we talked about way back on that other flow chart. How do we deliver to Sage what it says it wants on the day and in the quantity that was specified. So that's what we're going to do with an MRP. Okay. I don't mind taking a quick pause right here if there are any questions. Charlie, you've joined us, I believe. If there are any questions that are pertinent up to this point that would make more sense to answer now, I'd be happy to do so. Otherwise, I'll proceed. Okay, no questions yet. All right. So one thing you can, so I've created a schedule, and I'm actually going to run this two different ways. In one case, I am going to run it asking for sales orders, but then I'm going to erase it and do it again with a forecast. Okay, but just to show you how it would work in either case. And in this case, you can set the window as far into the future as you need. I mean, if your supplier lead times are relatively short, you'd probably have a smaller window than if you were bringing in parts from Europe or Asia. You can define what short means for you. If you say 0, then you're saying after you do all your planning, you want to end up with 0 inventory. Minimum is about typically it's halfway between 0 and reorder, so you can be more or less conservative as you wish. I've selected minimum, and in my little fake company, minimum usually means 1,000 units of something. So all of my planning wants to leave me with 1,000 units at the end of the day. Actually, on August 16th, I want to have purchased and consumed and built and transferred and all of that, and I still have 1,000 left of everything in MISys. Okay, and I have other choices. If I'm using alternate locations or alternate bill of material components, that's kind of sophisticated for today's purpose, but just so you know, we can do that sort of a thing. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to initialize. And it's reading. I only had a few sales orders in the system. Okay, I see there. Yes, there is. The question on lot number and serial traceability, yes, MISys has that. I'm not going to go down that trail right now, but yes, we have multi-level from supplier to customer, especially with Sage 300 also having lot and serial tracking. You have a perfect pipeline from exactly where your materials came from all the way to your customer. Okay. So let's see, where was I? So I did this initialization, and I go to the summary page, and it's showing me that based on some things that have happened, and I'm going to show you exactly when it was, but I start out with 1,405 of these I-50s, and then I drop below my minimum, which is the dotted red line. I go up a little bit, I go down a little bit, I go down a little bit, and I'm almost at 0 at the end of the, by August 16th. And I can follow along here. There's a drop of 1,250. That's a particular sales order, 71. I then have a work order to make 100, so I go up by 100. This is a balance. I have a sales order and a finished assembly plan for the same date. That's the one that we did before with the manufacturing order. I then have another sales order here, and I have another one way out here in late July. These were actually 3 different lines on order 74. So it dropped for the second part of that shipment, and then it dropped yet again. So it leaves me with 55 just above 0. I like to be up at the minimum quantity for me to be comfortable. So I'm going to purge this, but this is what it would look like if I was driving this from sales orders. So I'm going to purge that schedule, however, and I'm going to go back to the setup. I'm going to not include sales orders, though you could. Actually, you could do both. But I'm going to actually show you a schedule batch. So you might have a customer that delivers a spreadsheet, let's say, or some EDI or something like that that says, here's what we need of these items in these quantities on these dates, starting on May 24th and going through August 9th. It's a 3-month plan for this company XYZ. Okay, that could be their order. It could be your guess. It could be a forecast on your part. Whatever this might represent for you, it is your anticipation of your demand. So I'm going to reinitialize without sales orders being involved. And you'll notice that they're really, well, there's just a little demand for black tape there, and I think that's off of that one little work order I had was already in the system. I'm going to post my batch, though, which is a fairly substantial. I mean, there's a lot of units, a lot of sub-assemblies. Each of those 3 bills of material has different sub-assemblies that are involved, and I end up with, as you can tell, on the I-50, I'm way below 0 by the time I hit late July. With the I-51, it's not until early August, but you can see I started almost 3,000 on hand. I drop, by mid-June, late 2/3 of the way through June, I drop below min, but I'm above 0. And then in around July 11th, I drop below 0 and even further. And my I-52 will be quite similar. There is a question. Let's see what that is.
Hey, Al, Charlie,
Yeah.
I finally made it into the meeting.
Yeah, glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the question was, how does the production schedule reflect processing on multiple workstations in a sequence?
Right. That is another question. If you could hold off on that one for just a second, I will show you how that might work.
Right, I'll come back to that.
Because we do have, I think you're talking shop floor control and routing and operations and capacity. And it is true that these 3 bills of material do not reflect, other than that there's a limit that you can make up to only 1,000 in a 3-day period. Other than that, there are no routing details defined for these 3 bills of material. So I'm going to do that as a part B on this. Okay. So
Sure.
Based on this, what I would now do, because the fact that I drop way below on each of these, it also means to get me to end up here on the dotted red line means I have to make sub-assemblies, I have to buy raw materials, components, and all the rest. So the quick way for MISys to resolve all of the possible implications of meeting this demand and ending up with a minimum quantity on everything is to hit the resolve all shortage button, which is what I'm going to do. So MISys thinks about all of that. It makes some fairly fast computations, and very quickly you'll notice I end up with that right on the dotted red line. I end up with this on the dotted red line. My sub-assemblies are on the dotted red line, my I-40, my I-41, my I-45, even my hex nuts, that's a raw material. All of that material has been planned to use, and then receive. Why did I receive 1923 here? Because I want to end up with 1,000. I want to end up with 1,000. I want to end up all the way down to my last activity wants me to still end up with 1,000. And so for all of these things to happen, I have to receive certain quantities of this item on certain dates in order for me to maintain that quantity in hand. Now, some of these numbers are not the typical number. You're not going to buy 636 hex nuts. So what MISys is going to do is use minimum order quantities. They come in boxes of 1,000 or whatever to establish the appropriate amount that's going to come through, and that's going to percolate all the way down through the line. You're still going to end up with 1,000 at the end of that time frame. So I've done my resolution, and I'm now going to create an MRP based on that resolution of the master production schedule. So here's all my items right here. And here with wire, I'm looking at different dates and different quantities. To receive it on the 14th, you have to think about an order no later than June 5th. June 12th to have it come in on the 21st. For hex nuts, May 30th to have it in by June 10th. And these are the quantities, these are the exact quantities I need based on that master production schedule. But again, MISys is going to round all of this out. Different, again, all sorts of different items, quantities, and dates that it's required, okay? So what would you do now? Most of our buyers would, well, first you'd almost never have a list this long because you're using MRP every day and you're looking for modest adjustments into your demand. So this is something of a radical presentation as to how much you'd actually have to work your way through. But most of our buyers would use the buy detail. You'd see all your qualified suppliers. You'd hit new PO, and it's going to say, well, I mean, do you want multiples of reorder, or do you want as required? Well, typically you can't buy as required. They come in containers that have a specific quantity. So there's 1,000, and I'm going to say create that purchase order. The delivery due date is going to be June 21st, and that takes care of my first line. My second line, I'm in a position to be able to add as a new detail on that purchase order. Again, I'm going to not do as required. I'm going to do multiples of reorder, but that's going to come in on the 28th of June. I update my purchase order, and I work my way through all the way to maintain my appropriate inventory, which is maintaining 1,000 in my inventory at any point in time. The easy way to do this, it's great for demos, is to hit the Buy All button. And when I hit the Buy All button, it says, well, okay, MISys will pick based on which criteria is the most important for you, fewest orders, fastest delivery, lowest, or any, whatever the combination might be. I kind of like the idea of fewest orders myself. Fastest delivery, less important because you're doing all this planning well in advance. So it might look something like this. You want everything to come into location 1. If you say don't release the PO, you have the opportunity to make further changes. It's not a released purchase order yet. I'm going to not check that box. So these are all going to be purchase orders ready to go out the door. I hit Create Orders, and MISys forges ahead with creating what will probably be 10 or 12 purchase orders. It's picking the suppliers. It's picking the delivery due dates. It's rounding things up because I said multiples of reorder. It's using supplier price. I could have selected recent cost. There's a number of choices that are involved in that whole thing. But in effect, what I'm doing right now in this minute or so is creating an entire 3 months worth of purchase orders. The purchase orders are starting to be made right now. And I said 10 or 12, right? We'll see how accurate I am. Okay, there's one item that's going to be a little short. But if I click into purchase order 10, I have a series of items that are ready to be, oops, I thought I had purchase order 10. There it is. I've got a whole bunch of I-05s that are coming on different dates out into the future in different quantities, and that's going to look like this, and it's ready to be sent via email to my supplier. This is not a true company, obviously, so I'm not going to hit the send button, but it looks like this, or you can put your own logos and all those sorts of things, but you're going to have a a purchase order out of that process ready to go quite quickly. Again, I'm doing the very fastest way of doing this, and I'm not recommending that you do it this way, but I just wanted you to see how much work I could accomplish potentially in a very short period of time based on a dozen different orders, 3 different products, 12 different delivery due dates and quantities spread over the next 3 months. My last thing, and then I'll take a pause and any questions, of course. MISys also wants to tell me what my what sub-assemblies I'd have to build. Those are the I-40, I-41, and I-45, and in what quantities and on what dates, and my top-level products in what quantity and on what dates. So a start date, a completion date, and so forth and so on, all set and ready to go. And I would do the same thing again. Typically, I would start with a build detail, and of course, for you internally, you can build either the exact amount, or it may be more efficient for you to round it up to some number other than 318. So it's your call. You might want to make 500. And you'd say create, and you'd now have a work order to make 500 of those I-40s on that start date and completion date. Okay?
Al, that's great stuff.
Now, your question, Charlie, that you were asking on behalf of somebody else is, well, what if there were all these other implications, not just material, but around my my use of work centers, and if the person who asked that question, if you could maybe with the chat just respond and let Charlie know that that is in fact what you mean. MISys allows you to establish work centers that define how you make what you make. So instead of the bill of material that I have based this on, which was the I-50, if you remember this, there was a bunch of material. There was no routing here. If I was to have done all of this with R50s in mind, I would see not only materials, but I would also have a routing. And when I, okay, thank you. So that is what she means. So if I have those same quantities of demand, though those quantities with the R50 like take months to build. So I'm probably not gonna do the same numbers. But if I had, just to show you that part of what scheduling means, because I think that's where you're trying to get to, I'm gonna make a couple of manufacturing orders for the R50. I'll say the R50, and I'm not using the MRP to do this, but I want you to see the other side of scheduling, and this would, of course, show off of your MRP. And we're going to have as a start date, let's pick, come on, don't be sluggish. There we go. I'm going to start on Monday, and MISys automatically figures it's going to end on the 29th. Why? Because if I make 100 R50s, there's going to be 1,000 plus minutes of kitting, 1,500 minutes of assembly, 600 of grinding, 500 of drilling and polishing. Even though there's overlap, it's still going to, and I'll show you exactly why it says the date that it says. It's because if, based on estimated time, these are the work centers that will be consumed, with you finishing up, all things being perfect, you'll finish up just shy of 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 29th of May. So, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, that I also have one more here. I'll do a second manufacturing order. I'm going to clone the first one, well, the second one. So it's, again, R50s, and let's pretend it's a slightly different amount. We'll say it's 125, and which means, of course, every stage is going to take a slightly different amount of time. And let's say I'm going to start this, yeah, we'll say on the 20th again. It doesn't matter. So I've got 2 manufacturing orders, both with demands on the same operations or work centers. I think it was the term that you used, and we use that as well. So I'm releasing those orders. What MISys allows you to do, and of course from an MRP perspective, you'd want to do this before you made your purchase decisions, which that sort of very strongly ties back into the process that we had already done. Until you know what your real start dates and finish dates are going to be based on capacity, you'd want to hold off on committing to the purchase orders in that sense. So from this angle, I can now look at these 2 manufacturing orders from a shop operations point of view. And I'm going to select, yes, each, yes, and I'll show you that in a moment too.
I was referring to the new question that says, can each workstation have a separate formula reflecting ingredients added to each workstation?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep, not a problem. So now but right now I want to see what conflicts are in place if I was to try to make those 2 bills and start them both on the same day. And what I'm seeing here is there's an overlap, obviously. There's an overlap on kitting. There's an overlap on assembly. There's an overlap on grinding. Now, the only one of these that I have an alternative, the way you solve the conflict is you either reassign to a different kitting group. Kitting 1 does this one, and kitting 2 does this one, and assembly team A does this one, and assembly team B does this one. I don't have multiple teams for the kitting and the assembly. I do for grinding, and what I could do, just to show you how that part of it works, is you left-click and you assign the second one to grind the other piece of equipment that does the grinding, and you notice a bunch of conflict disappeared immediately. But I'm also have the option to just slide this forward a little bit, and that pretty much takes care of everything. What's the penalty on that is I'm not going to be done as quickly as I thought. It moves out to the 9th for my last step, which is the quality test. But I do have a conflict-free, and again, that's a very fast view of the whole thing. But there's no double bookings based on my work center view, and my view on the orders. Well, they're a little bit different, but it's all doable now. For your other question about, well, okay, what, and hopefully this is what you mean, but you will note in a system that, here it is, this is the field I'm looking for. Every item that's needed for the build is also going to be told when it's required in the operation. So, and just to make it a little bit different, you might have those 2 sub-assemblies might not really be needed until you reach the final assembly. The lamp isn't needed until the final quality test. These 4 things are needed right away at the kitting, so right at the start, that sort of a thing. Whether this really makes sense in an engineering sense or not is irrelevant, but I think that's what you mean, so that as you build this R50, you're going to see what you're doing and what materials are needed at that step, what you're doing and who's doing it. We have labor, different types of labor associated, what material is needed, what labor, what equipment is needed. This is called a bill of manufacturing, and you have a complete picture of the of every component all the way through. There's my 2 sub-assemblies, and then there's my my final light bulb, and the guy pulls the chain to make sure it starts. But that, if that's what you mean by that question, then yes, MISys lets you select when the material is needed at what point in the process.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
So you've shown how the production schedule is dependent on how long it takes at each workstation, which makes total sense.
Yep.
But the other part is how long does it take a supplier to provide those materials to you based on your history with them? So I think you went right over that, but that's part and parcel of the MRP function, correct?
Yes, that is true. So every item that you buy, you are going to establish every supplier has their lead time, and they may be wildly different. So if you have, this one just has one. Let me go to, well, I want to get out of, here we go. Here's one that has two, and let's pretend this one's 8 days, but it's 25% more expensive. This one's slower. So in your setup in MISys, you would want to put a preferred order lead time. When you run MRP, you want to have a number here that reflects your best choice out of that situation. If you have to spend more because you have less time, essentially you're expediting with a different supplier, then I mean, you could certainly put 8 there if you wanted, but the point is, from a planning point of view, put in a number that makes the most sense for you in your planning. The reason it has to be generic in the sense, I mean, you could have 10 different suppliers with lead times all over the map. What is the one that makes the most sense from a planning perspective? If you had your way and your preferred outcome, what would that number of days be? And that's the number that, or even a safety. It might be a longer period because, look, I'd rather get it 5 days early than have it 5 days late from when we need it. So put your, you're going to establish that here, but each supplier is actually going to have their own order lead time, and you can even rate this over time. Is that accurate? Is it really 10 days? Is it, MISys allows you to track the performance of your supplier over time. But yes, MISys is very conscious of those numbers.
Great. Now, I know on the list of folks that we're going to attend, there are some existing customers, some even one of our competitors. Welcome to the program. And it's interesting though, they all have different perspectives. Some current customers as well. But if you were to encapsulate, Al, what is the biggest benefit of using this time-phased MRP? What would you say it is?
Well, it's the time phase. It's by being sensitive to the calendar, again, with the supplier lead times and your assembly lead times, which, by the way, that whole detour into routings and so forth, that is the most accurate way by far to know exactly what your assembly lead time is going to be. To make 100 is going to be 9 days from your start, but of course that might be that's based on a 40-hour work week. When you add routings to MISys, you then actually have to define what your shifts are, because otherwise it doesn't have any meaning anymore as to what your constraints are. So once I start using routing details, I have a standard production shift, but obviously you can make evening shifts, night shifts, and so forth and so on. But and as many options, keep adding pieces of equipment that do the same thing. That adds to your capacity as well. But it's the timing that is the important thing in MRP. So it's not only knowing what you have to buy and what you have to build, but when it needs to be received on the loading dock and when it has to be completed on the shop floor. so that the final objective, if we go back to the way back to the original view over here, the final objective is to, actually that's not the one I meant, it's this one. Here we go, our flow chart. The final objective is that MISys delivers exactly what Sage is expecting in the quantity that it asks for and on the day that it asks for it to be there. And so that kind of, I mean, that's a crucial cog for many of our customers. Not everyone needs that, but if timing things and being able to deliver to customers on a and not running out of key items and not having to back order things and tell your customers, oh, we won't have that for another 2 weeks. That's the kind of thing that MRP can solve for you, hands down.
Great, thanks. And I don't see any other questions coming across, but Imran, if you have any other questions coming from the folks that are in attendance, would love to handle them. I think Al, you covered the agenda as we set it out, which is great.
I would is not to rush out, but I don't want to keep people any longer than they want to either. But there are two. I actually showed you one other MRP, which is where you buy for the manufacturing order, if you can remember that. I actually had a shopping list for just this build. There are two other MRPs that are not time sensitive, but for some of the people in attendance, this may be all they need. This one, called Buyer's Advice, just says, hey, in any particular location or all my locations or whatever, show me everything that's below reorder point or below minimum or below zero. And, well, I can preview it first, but I can actually create an MRP. Let's see if there's any on the list. Yeah, okay, there's a bunch of things here. And if this worked for me as to how I make my decisions, it's not going to be time sensitive, but it would lead me to a shopping list on that basis, and I would work my way through and buy those things. This one, called Stock Check, allows me to do different transactions hypothetically. Typically, it's assembled from stock. So you'd say to MISys, what if I built 1,000 I-50s and what if I built 1,000 I-51s? Pretend to assemble them. So I'll do one of them. In fact, I'll just do one item so that I don't take any more time. But if I said if I was to build 3,000 I-50s, what would that do? So this has no sense of calendar. It's kind of a flat view, but it would show me what would go negative in that situation. I'd be below zero on everything but this, and I'd be just above zero on that. So I would set about to create, and I just click the Create MRP, and it gives me the same interface to buy the materials that I need. If I decide that's what I have to do, is build 3,000 I-50s, this is what I better have coming in before I start out building that those I-50s. So
that's
I just wanted some of. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, it's just a different way to skin the cat, but without any kind of time sensitivity, right?
Right. It's and these both come with the core modules, so there's nothing. There's no extra cost on this. This is a separate module in MISys, but I've had a number of customers, and from my own personal experience, where that level of MRP is just fine for them, and it just has to do with the nature of what they build, and they're typically like large units, like a turbine or something, and they make one for the next 2 months. They're not large quantities and so forth, but they just say, okay, we're making another turbine, and let's create the shopping list, and everything comes in, and there isn't a time crunch or anxiety. The customer is expecting it sometime in Q4 or whatever. So there is another question there, though, Charlie.
We do, and the question just came in. After you've completed production, What goes into your cost for values? Is it the actual values? Is it LIFO, FIFO? Is the BOM adjusted for each production run to reflect the actual usage? I guess that's two questions.
Yeah, there's a few questions there, actually. First of all, in MISys, part of what we didn't spend a lot of time on is, I was saying there was all kinds of choices you make in the initial setup, but one of those will be your costing method, and we offer standard, average, FIFO, and LIFO. So my answer to the question is going to be depends on which one of these you have selected. If you have standard, you've established standard costs, and those standard costs are going to keep reflecting until you change your standard costs, and you're going to capture variances off that standard, both purchase price variances and assembly variances, and that's what you'd look at and analyze as you make determinations about your assembly costs and your profitability and so forth and so on. And it also helps ring the bell when it's time to strongly consider changing your standard cost. If you're running FIFO or LIFO, it's going to be as close to actual as you can get, because when you run out of the dollar widgets and your next receipt of widgets all cost you $2, your assembly cost immediately goes up as you start to consume the $2 widgets. So that's the the most critical decision in all of that. But even having said that, within the MO, the costing will adjust based on all sorts of things that happen out of this. I mean, you can scrap on a line-by-line basis. You can have a variable yield if you're doing things like liquids and so forth. You can make adjustments after the release even. You can say, you know what, I mean, again, it depends on the type. It wouldn't make sense with this product, but you could say, we really needed 105 of those. And at the end of the build, you're going to see costing that reflects your variance from the day you released it, which was supposed to cost you $14.90, and it's going to cost you maybe a little bit more between scrap and labor that you can't necessarily be certain of, and you will see that reflected in your final cost of the build. If you do the routing type of use of MISys, and by that I mean where you have not only the material getting consumed, and you can still do that around scrapping and all that, but you're also going to tell MISys, well, what was the real amount of time for each of these stages, and because of that, your labor is going to vary as you tell MISys how long it really took to do the kitting. It wasn't 1,002, it was 1,200, which means a couple of hours more of a particular labor cost would be applied. There is another question there.
That's true. That's true, and it may require some help offline, but the question is, sorry to backtrack, but no problem. We're happy about that. But once you post a batch and resolve all your shortages, I believe it was probably from the MRP, the master production schedule is not showing in-process MRP list. Al, do you understand that one?
I would say for the purpose of this session, I would say that would be better to bring to our tech support, and I mean, because that could be I mean, now we're getting into analyzing exactly what you might be doing. I mean, I will say that whatever you do, I mean, so you run you develop your master production schedule, you run MRP, you make decisions or not. Remember, there's no gun on your at your head where you have to buy everything on that list. That's why you have a buyer. And that's why that buyer can decide, well, you know what, we really don't have to go that well. I did buy everything, didn't I, with the buy all button?
Yep.
But that isn't a guarantee. But anything that is now in your system, when I go back to my MRP and I'm going to purge this. I mean, this would be like tomorrow or the next day. All of those purchase orders are now involved in the view that's being read here. So I've got all kinds of things that are going to show. Look, I mean, here's my I-19s from my previous MRP. Because I didn't establish all the production orders that were recommended. Remember, I did all the buying, but I didn't actually do the build all. So what does this show? It shows that I've got like 11 million I-19s by the middle of August because I never established the consumption of them on the other side. And but the reason this is good to show you though is that any further decisions I make now reflect any commitments I made either on the buy or build side. So I don't know if that helps your specific situation, but that should be, I'm just trying to interpret your phrase, my master production schedule is not showing in the process MRP list. I mean, you should have committed bills and buys to whatever degree you made decisions to do so. And remember, you can create a master production schedule that's your wildest, most rosy scenario. You don't have to choose anything off of that, right? You might just say, well, I just wanted to see what would happen. I mean, what if our growth was 40% a month for the next 6 months? What would that do to us? And but that's as far as you might want to take it. So I guess, I mean, feel free to call me directly if you want, I mean, but your best bet is actually to call tech support and explain to them what you're seeing, and they would help you. And there's also an MRP training workshop. I don't know what the next one scheduled is, but if you haven't done that, that's a great 4 hours to spend with our consultants for that process.
Yeah, and also the folks at BASS who are putting on this webinar, they have in-house expertise to help with that.
Correct. Thank you, Charlie. That is absolutely correct.
Whether it's Chris, Sam Umali, those guys have been doing BASS implementations for quite a long while. MISys implementations, not BASS implementations. Well,
yeah. BASS/MISys implementations.
BASS/MISys. It sounds like an interesting term. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Al. I think this was scheduled from 12 to 1, and it is now 1 p.m., I believe.
Well, thank you all for spending some time with us, and if we can help any further as we proceed, don't hesitate to let us know.
Yeah,
and stay in touch with BASS, of course.
Yeah. Imran, just let us know if there's anything that comes afterwards, and we'd be happy to follow up and take care of any questions and help you guys.
Great. It's actually Nima, not Imran, but I will definitely let you know in case something comes through. So thank you so much, Al and Charlie. And if there's any other questions, we will definitely direct them to you.
All right. Great. Thank you. And
everybody.
Nima, sorry, I was posing as you as the panelist, so I appreciate your
No problem.
appreciate you lending the authority.
I like you as a Nima, Charlie. I think that really fits. Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks. Take care.